There was a time when words were dangerous, when silence was safer than speaking, and telling the truth could cost your life. This is the story of one poet, a man whose words became his weapon, his voice, and in the end, his final message. A message not just for his own time, but for everyone who would come after him. The streets were quiet, but not in peace. Soldiers stood on every corner, their guns resting on their shoulders, eyes watching everyone. Posters hung on walls, pictures of the leader, smiling like a father, but behind that smile was fear. Every newspaper printed the same story, every radio repeated the same message. No one dared to question. No one dared to ask why. In those days, even the air felt heavy, as if it carried secrets no one wanted to hear. But inside a small, dark room, one man refused to stay silent. He was not a soldier, not a leader, just a poet, sitting at a wooden desk with a notebook and a pen. His poems were not about flowers or love, but about truth, freedom, and the quiet pain people carried inside their hearts. For him, words were not just words. They were the only light left in the dark. At first, his poems stayed hidden, written in the middle of the night, folded between old books, kept away from eyes that could not be trusted. But words have a way of finding their path. His friends read his poems, then copied them and passed them on, like whispers moving through the streets. Some called him brave. Others called him foolish. They warned him, in times like these, words are bullets. But the poet only smiled and said, "If we stop writing the truth will disappear." Then came the night that changed everything. There was a knock at the door, loud, angry, the kind that fills a house with fear. Soldiers stormed inside, turning over chairs, pulling books off shelves, searching every corner. They found his poems, pages filled with forbidden words, words that spoke of freedom and truth. The poet stood quietly as they read his verses out loud, their hands shaking with anger. Before they dragged him away, the poet reached under his bed and pulled out one small notebook, his final notebook. On the first page, in clear, simple handwriting, he wrote a single word, Habilin, a word that means last message, final wish, or a truth left behind. This would be his last poem, the poem they could not take from him. In his Habilin, the poet wrote, "They can take my voice, but they cannot silence my words. They can lock my body, but they cannot lock the truth." If you are reading this, remember, freedom is not a gift. It is something you must protect, even when it is hard to see, even when it feels impossible to keep. That was his last message, not just to his friends, but to every heart still beating in silence. The poet was taken away that night. No one knows exactly what happened to him after that. Some say he was tortured. Some say he died alone in a prison cell, with only silence for company. But his words refused to die. Hidden in that small notebook, his Habilin passed from hand to hand, copied in secret, whispered at night, written on scraps of paper and school walls. What started as one poet's final message became the voice of 1,000 hearts. Students, workers, mothers, and even strangers who had never met the poet began to carry his words like a flag. In the darkest moments, when fear was the strongest, they remembered his Habilin. They remembered his belief that words can outlive guns. Years later, when people finally filled the streets, not with fear, but with courage, they carried candles, flowers, and banners painted with the very words the poet once wrote in silence. The poet never lived to see the day martial law fell. But his Habilin stood there, in every hand, in every voice shouting for freedom. His final message became the spark that lit the fire. And when the dictator's voice was silenced, it was the poet's voice that remained, carried by the people who refused to forget. Because some words are not just poetry. Some words are not just ink on paper. Some words become a path to freedom. This was the story of the poet's last message, a story from the dark days of martial law. But now, this story doesn't belong to history books. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who believes that truth, no matter how dangerous, must always find a way to be heard. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that must never be forgotten.